Okay, we're about to start. Thank you so much, everyone, for your patience. This is workshop number 3 for in celebration of Filipino American Heritage Month, Filipino American History Month, excuse me. We're so fortunate to have a special speaker for today. I'm just really honored to welcome him. Joe currently works at the Office of Intercultural Affairs at Loyola Marymount University, researching and developing policies aimed at increasing institutional diversity. He also serves as an adjunct professor for LMU's Asian and Asian Pacific American Studies Department. Joe continues to be active in the Filipino American community, serving on the board of the Filipino Workers Center and the executive committee of the Historic Filipino Town Coalition, and co-hosting the podcast This Filipino American Life. Joe earned his PhD in history from the University of Washington in 2014, writing a dissertation on the history of Little Manila, historic Filipino town in Los Angeles. It's such an honor to welcome Dr. Joe Bernardo for tonight's workshop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lily, for that intro. And thanks for the folks behind SoCal Filipinos for inviting me here to do this little workshop about Baybayin. And it's Baybayin is basically the pre-Hispanic Filipino or Filipino script. Um, Let me share my PowerPoint. You can all see that? Yes?
Yes.
Someone shout out. Okay, thank you. All right, just making sure. Um, yeah, so Baybayin, it's the pre-colonial script of the Philippines. It has different names, which I'll get to in a bit. But I'll share a little bit about a history of it, and then we'll go into how to write it, how to kind of decipher Baybayin, and then we'll talk about kind of what its importance is to Filipino culture and Filipino kind of the Filipino community, especially here in Southern California. Okay, so all right. So basically, this is Baybayin. This is the script. It consists of 3 vowels and 14 consonants. Um, and I'll get into kind of how to write it, how to read it in a bit. Um, Let me just kind of give you a bit of an overview of the history of Baybayin. It's actually Baybayin means to spell, and it's the Tagalog kind of name for Baybayin or for the script, right? Um, this graph, which you probably may seen kind of floating in the internet the last few months, it's a little misleading because it kind of suggests that each individual Filipino group had their own script, but it's more or less the same script, but just called different things depending on where you lived. So, for example, Kapampangan's called the script Kulitan, um, Ilocanos call it Gordita, so on and so forth. The only ones who are different I would point out, are the ones in the bottom, the Jawi and the Karim. These were, these scripts are more, Arabic, because those were Muslim dominated areas at the time. Okay, but a lot of these names for the script are of the same script. Okay. And when the Spanish actually arrived to the Philippines, and they were, beginning their colonization of the Philippines, they remarked on how so many people actually, so many Filipinos or people of the Philippines, the natives actually knew how to write the script. So, Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, Chirino, and De Morga all wrote how, all throughout the islands, most of the natives knew how to write the language, women as well as men. So that's another kind of hint at pre-colonial Filipino culture, that women were able to write, and they had kind of equal footing in society at the time. I would say that a little bit of these a little bit of these accounts are little exaggerated. There are peoples, communities in the Philippines who did not know how to write in a script. Mainly people who communities that lived in highland areas like the mountains, um, the Bontok, the Igorot people, for example, some of the Lumad people in the south. They did not have a written script, um, and they were more based on oral tradition. And I'll get into kind of the oral tradition a little bit later. So, some of the uses of the pre-colonial script. They were basically used for short messages to each other, um, but the real big one was using Baybayin script as notes for oral tradition. So when the native Filipinos would gather together, they would have they would perform for each other, like write songs, perform songs, write poems, do prayers and ceremonies. They actually use Baybayin script as like their notes. So it's more of a note taking tool to for them to perform a lot of their oral traditions. Okay, and a lot of the stuff, a lot of the script that was written, a lot of the stuff that they wrote were written in perishable materials. So they were scribed into bamboo or like a piece of bark or something like that. There was no like pen and paper. There's no ink at the time. So most of it was written in perishable materials, which didn't last very long. All right. And you could see there are some remnants, there's some communities that still write in a form of Baybayin, a form of a pre-Hispanic script. This is a woman from the Mangyan tribe, Mangyan peoples of Mindoro. So they continue to write in their script today, and you could see they're inscribing their script into bamboo. All right, and the loss of Baybayin. Why did a majority of the people of the Philippines lose kind of the script, that lose the cultural um, uh, heritage of Baybayin? Um, of course, it happens to be because of Spanish colonization. For those who don't know, Spanish came and colonized the Philippines beginning really in 1565. For 333 years, they colonized the Philippines. And in the beginning, there were um, in the beginning they still used some Baybayin, but in really in a few generations, Baybayin lost its use because of the changing economy, the changing society, and Spanish friars really introducing the Roman alphabet to the Philippine language. This is an example of kind of the transition between using Baybayin to using Roman alphabets. This is the first book that was published in the Philippines, the Doctrina Christiana, and that was published in 1593. And it's basically, a tool on um, how to how to sorry, it was a tool to teach people how to pray, right? Teach people how to pray in the Catholic way, right? Um, hold on. I know there's some. Okay. Revival, right? There were some revivals of the script in our history. The Katipunan, if you're familiar with Philippine history, Katipunan was the secret society that rose up arms against Spain in the late 1890s, and they used Baybayin as kind of a a symbol to represent kind of rebellion against Spanish colonization. And you could see right here is a the sun, and then there's a Baybayin script in the middle of it. That's Ka. That is the symbol for Ka or K, right? And Ka was Katipunan. Um, it's an important kind of letter or important kind of a syllable in the Philippine, especially Tagalog language. If you hear people, especially activists, say, "Oh, Kajo, Kajason," Kalili, ka John Eric. It's basically ka really means connectedness, right? So if you look at certain words like kaibigan, the root word is ibig, means love, but ka is meaning kind of together, kind of brings it all together. Kaibigan. Kababayan, the root word is bayan, right? But ka really kind of makes it into more of a deeper meaning. Um, what's another one? Kalayaan, right, which means freedom. The root word is layao, which means to cradle, or but they use it into freedom, right? So ka is a really important letter in the Tagalog language. It means more than just an actual letter. It means connectedness to other people. Okay, so the Katipunan really tried to revive Baybayin as well. But the real kind of renaissance of Baybayin is actually, rooted in Filipino Americans, the Filipino American community. And I'm sure like many of you have, like me, grew up in the 80s and 90s, and you started seeing by the 90s a lot of um, tattoos, a lot of artwork, necklaces, T-shirts that really show Baybayin in its form, right? And that was part of kind of a larger cultural renaissance of reclaiming your roots in the Philippines, reclaiming your Filipino American roots. And I would argue that, of course, this is Filipino American History Month. Uh, we have to kind of acknowledge, and I would argue, acknowledge that Filipino Americans were really at the forefront in reviving Baybayin in in Philippine and Filipino American society. Um, and just a note, many people, especially back then, used to refer to the pre-colonial script as Alibata. That's actually a misnomer. It's not the real true word. Alibata was actually just a name that some scholar made up in the 1920s. Um, so the actual kind of proper name for Tagalog script is Baybayin. There's other, of course, like you showed in the map, there are other names for the script in Kapampangan, in Bicolano, in Bisaya, etc. But Tagalog's, the kind of real word for it is Baybayin, means to spell. Alibata is just a made up word. Um, so just to let folks know who perhaps maybe grew up with that word, Alibata, but actually it's Baybayin. Okay. And of course, with technology, right? You have people actually making fonts out of Baybayin. This is a font that you can download on. This is on my phone, and of course, I always have to rep the Dodgers, so I put here "Go Dodgers" here in Baybayin. So yeah, you could download it. You could download it onto your computer. I used it to make this PowerPoint, and you could do it on Microsoft Word. All those things. It's I believe it's called Tagalog script or something like that. You could look it up. That's not too hard to find. All right. So any questions about kind of the history of Baybayin?
No.
Anybody? No.
No.
All right. So that's kind of the basic history of Baybayin. So we'll get to how to write it. All right. Hold on. I got to close some windows so I can see. All right. So again, it's made up of 17 characters, and they represent syllables. Okay, they're syllables. They're not letters. Each character represents a syllable. Okay, and there are 14 consonants and 3 vowels. So each symbol represents a syllable. So if you're writing talaga, which means right, talaga, you would write ta right here, ta, la, ga, talaga. Okay, and that's how you would write that word. And I should note that if you see the script, it's kind of normal or not normal, but it's how do you say its default word or default sound is ah. So it would be ba, ka, da, ga, ha, la, ma. Okay, so you would have to add a modifier to change it to a different sounding syllable. So here's another example. La, right? La here. Sa. La sa means taste. It's also a good restaurant in Chinatown. If you ever go to Chinatown, it's a really great restaurant owned by the Valencia brothers. Nawawala. So na wa wa la means nawawala, like it got lost, right? Um, so na wa wa la. Okay, nawawala. So that's simple, right? Those are remember uh, uh, it means that each character are syllables. Okay. The wrong way to write Baybayin is to treat it as letters, right? They're not letters; they're syllables. Okay, so this would be a wrong way of saying talaga. If you used it as each letter, it would be ta a la a ga a, right? And that doesn't make sense, right? So again, remember each character is a syllable. All right, and I want to introduce to you the kudlit. So kudlit is a mark that is placed either above or below the character that would change the sound of the syllable. So for ka, if you add a kudlit to the top of the symbol, it becomes either ke or ki. Okay. Um, and then if you add it to the bottom, it would be either ko or ku. Okay. So for example, if I wanted to write datu, it would be da, and then I would use the ta symbol and then add a kudlit in the bottom. So it'll be tu, datu. Datu is basically a pre-colonial chieftain in the Philippines. That's what they call kind of the chief of a certain barangay, datu. Um, Salita, right? So sa, we'll get the la symbol and add a kudlit on top to make it li, and then ta, salita, right? It means to talk. Okay, so again, kudlit modifies the regulatory ka sound to either ka or ki, or from, or if you put it in the bottom, it's ko or ku, right? And you could use it for any of the symbols here, except for the vowels. Okay, so the vowels, usually the consonants already have. Uh, okay, I'll get to the questions later. Sorry, I just saw that question. Um, So if you have a vowel that is in a word that doesn't have like a consonant next to it, like ina, right? You use the vowels here. There's no kudlit that goes into the vowels, so it already sounds like an e, or o u. So na, na. Where is it? Na, right? Or ina means mother. U lo, right? So u, and then tuck the la, ulo, right? You put the kudlit in the bottom to make it o. So ulo, or maaga. So ma, it's here, ma, and then and then ga. Maaga means early. Okay. So that's how we use the vowels. All right. So uh when the Spanish came to the Philippines and started learning how to use the Baybayin, started to learn it, they were kind of confused because there were no kind of final consonants. Like you couldn't use um, a consonant by itself, basically, right? So how they wrote, how pre-Hispanic people, the Philippines wrote was they basically didn't have the final consonant. So ngayon, which is means today or now. You use nga and then yo, and then there is no final consonant, so you wouldn't be able to use it. So they just use two syllables to mention, to say ngayon. Same with simbahan, which means church, right? Si, and then they didn't use an M here. Si ba ha, and then they didn't use the N, right? So it makes it a little confusing, right? So like, why did they do this? Why didn't they have a final consonant? Like, why couldn't they use a consonant by itself? It was because, and people, some scholars have theorized, was that because it was such like an oral tradition, they used Baybayin for oral traditions, for reciting poems, for singing, to reciting prayers. They really use Baybayin for notes, right? It's like kind of like a, okay, these are my notes, but my real kind of performance is actually oral, right? So by looking quickly at your notes in Baybayin, you could kind of jog your memory and sing the song, right? It was just kind of like a notes for you, just in case you forget like certain words, right? And then here again is another example, pa sa lu po, and then there's no ng for pasalubong, right? Um, Pasalubong is basically a gift that you bring to people when you're visiting or returning from somewhere. Okay. So a wrong way of using this, using baybayin for simbahan would be using the consonants without, and I'll get to it, but using a final consonant. So like this would be simabahana, right? That doesn't make sense. The real proper way would be simbahan. So the only three characters using um, uh, to only three characters because it represents three syllables. Okay. And so the Spanish got kind of confused. They're like, why don't you have like a consonant by itself? So what they did is they created a cross kudlit, right? So instead of like a little dot or little kind of just a little mark or check, they would use a cross. Of course, it's Spanish colonization. Most of them are friars. They wanted to spread Catholicism, so they use a cross to represent the final consonant. So again, like ngayon, oops, sorry. Ngayon now is you can actually read it as ngayon with the final consonant N. Same with simbahan and then pasalubong. Okay. So if you want to use the consonant by itself, you use the cross kudlit in the bottom. It's always at the bottom. You don't put it on the top. Okay. So foreign letters. So I get asked all the time, "Hey, can you translate this? Can you translate that?" And a lot of them are like foreign letters, or like Spanish names, Spanish last names, or like even English last names. So what you do is when you want to kind of translate foreign letters or foreign words into Baybayin, you have to spell it out I guess the Tagalog way of spelling things out. So for example, J, um, there's no kind of J in Baybayin, so the substitute would be dy, ja. So jeepney would be jeepney, right? And then for Z, it would be S, right? The Z would be S. So instead of Zabala, it would be Sabala, right? So then if you want to spell out jeepney, you would have to use this spelling. Oops. You would have to use the dy spelling of jeepney and then go D Yeepney. Okay. And then same with Zabala, it would be Sabala. So Sabala. Right. And I was asked one time, hey, how do you can you translate my last name? It's Wallace. Right. So I had to translate it to Wallace, right? And it looks like Wallace, right? Like as as a broom. So it would be Wallace. Okay. So that's how you would translate kind of foreign letters, foreign words into Baybayin. You first have to change the spelling to make it more the way Tagalogs would spell it. Um, Again, sorry, this is very Tagalog specific or Tagalog centric. This is the way I was taught, and unfortunately, that's the way kind of it's been passed on. And I think there needs to be other scholars from different regions to really do more digging and investigating how it works in other languages. And some other etc. I use at iba pa, that kind of acronym. to kind of just explain that these are kind of just extra kind of tips or rules. Um, you'll notice there's no ra with R sound. Um, but if you speak Tagalog or you speak other languages, D or L can be acceptable translations. Tagalogs actually use D for ra, excuse me, or da or ra. And then I forgot. I think Ilocanos use la for ra. So da or la could be a uh, can be a substitute for the ra sound. And then punctuation. The only punctuation that is in Baybayin is either a single line or double line, right? And it's to just to connote a pause, a comma, or a period, right? So if you just in case you see, Baybayin written, you'll see maybe a double line or single line, and that's just to let you know that it's actual a stop, like a pause in the sentence. Okay. Um, all right. So now I want you all to practice. Okay. Uh, I want you to practice based on what I have taught you to basically translate these words. Okay. So go ahead and start. I want you give you a couple seconds to look it over. The first one. Does anybody have a guess? Not a guess, but can anybody decipher or translate the top line?
Lalaki.
Yes, lalaki,
Lalaki.
lalaki, right? Which means what? Means man,
Yes.
male. Okay. How about the next one?
Babae.
Yes, babae. And those are some easy ones, right? Babae means woman, female. Okay, the next one.
Kaibigan?
Kaibigan. All right. Kaibigan, which means friend. Okay, the next one. Anybody? Next one.
Oh, was that two words?
Yes,
Okay.
actually, it should be.
I was trying to figure it out as one word.
Is it mahal kita?
Oh, I love you too. I love you. Yes, mahal kita. Yes, mahal kita. All right, the last one.
Mabaho.
All right. Bakit? Umutot ka?
Naman.
Yes, mabaho. That is correct. Mabaho. All right. So you got some practice done, right? Um okay. That kind of brings me to the conclusion of the how to write it part. Are there any questions?
Joe, you have a question on the chat. One of them
Okay.
is the first one. You said that Babayin was revived because of films. Why is that?
I think particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a kind of a um, renaissance, if you will, or of a movement of Filipino Americans who grew up in um, during that time. Again, if you look at kind of immigration history, right, you see that most Filipinos who came to the United States came after 1965, right? Because there was an Immigration Act of 1965, which opened kind of the doors to migrate to the United States, right? So a lot of Filipinos who came during the 60s and 70s, their children became college age teenagers in the 80s and 90s, right? So during that time, there's a huge influx of Filipinos going to college. They wanted to kind of learn about themselves, right? Um, they started getting involved with the PCN, all the Filipino clubs and stuff like that, and they wanted to really kind of go back to the roots. And people have um, people started to discover, hey, we have our own script, right? And a lot of it has to do with going with seeing other Asian Americans and other communities having their own kind of script, and they felt that, hey, we have to revive this, right? So Filipino Americans were really, I would argue, at the forefront of reviving the script, and you see a lot more of that now in the Philippines now. But I remember going to the Philippines when I was 15 years old, and I knew Baybayin, or I knew of Baybayin. And then my cousin, who was going to school at the time, and she happened to be learning the unit in school was learning about Baybayin. And she goes like, oh, walang kwenta to. Like, this doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to know this stuff, right? But then me as a Philam, like trying to like search for my history, search for my identity and stuff like that. Um, I was like, why don't you care about this? This is important. This is your culture, right? But again, that's kind of the uh, uh, basic kind of relationship at play. I could go much more deeper as to why, but hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you for that. There's another question. You mentioned this in the presentation. Where where can people look for more information on Ilocano Babayan?
So I haven't done much research, to be honest with you, on Ilocano Baybayin, but I'm sure there's something on the internet on, I forgot the name of it. I think Gorditan. So if you look that up, perhaps there would be more resources on that. Um, there's a linguistic or linguist out there, Carl Rubino, who's like a linguist in Ilocano. He may have written some stuff on the pre-colonial Ilocano script, so you'll have to look that up.
And then one final question on the chat. Does it matter if it's written horizontally or vertically?
It doesn't matter. You could write horizontally or vertically. A lot of artists have kind of taken liberty and done it either way. Um, from what scholars know, Baybayin is written from left to right. And but vertically, yeah, you could still write it that way and it'll be fine. All right.
Thanks,
Any other
Cheryl.
questions? All right. So let's move on. Just quickly, I'll just do this quickly. We all learned kind of the basics of Bye and how it's written. But I want to kind of just talk about kind of the importance of it and what it would look like if the Philippines actually instituted a whole educational system and really changed its society to embrace Baybayin into society. This is just a photo of popular Filipino brands um, that were kind of remade using Baybayin. You could see, Jollibee here. This is Mang Inasal, Globe, which is it Globe or Smart? One of those things. So yeah, you could see kind of the difference, right? You could see the difference using Baybayin as opposed to using the Roman alphabet, right? There's been a movement to incorporate Baybayin a lot more. This is actually a sign in one of the underpasses in Manila, where they translated kind of the names of like Intramuros, National Museum, into Baybayin. There's a little bit of controversy because of this, because using Baybayin, nobody really uses it anymore, and nobody uses it unless you learn it. And the reason how you learn it is, if you're educated. So people who are not educated won't know how to use Baybayin. And people say that it creates even a more of a intellectual gap, right? Or like a linguistic gap between rich and poor if we start using Baybayin. That's kind of what people argue. All right. And I just want to kind of bring this back to kind of locally here in Los Angeles and Southern California, since we are kind of SoCal Filipinos. I just want to talk about kind of what Baybayin can do to kind of really give more visibility to Filipinos in the United States, in particular here in Los Angeles. This is a map of historic Filipino town, which is just west of downtown LA. I know there's been posts about like, oh, what's historic Filipino town? What's so Filipino about it? I would argue that using Baybayin would actually accentuate historic Filipino town and other kind of Filipino concentrations around Southern California. If you see here, you see this is kind of markers that mark the entrance into historic Filipino town and just kind of giving it a little bit more visibility. Some of you are familiar with the mural that's on Beverly Boulevard. If you follow Will Dasovich, he just did a video on historic Filipino town, which I believe already has like 2.8 million views. This is just a little bit more sites in the area. This is the World War II Veterans Memorial, the only one in the nation dedicated to Filipino World War II veterans. And of course, Filipino Worker Center has a jeepney, and if you're lucky, you could take a tour of historic Filipino town in a jeepney. These are some of the organizations that are located in the area, right? FASG, Filipino Worker Center, FACLA building right here, Filipino American Community of Los Angeles, and SIPA, which just demolished this building, and they're going to put up a new building with affordable housing. These are some of the churches that are in the area. And of course, you have the businesses. Then in the area, you have Bai Kubo, Temple Seafood. This is, if you're familiar with the park's finest. Dollar Hits. If you're craving for Filipino street food, go to Dollar Hits. I went there one time and got the dollar shits, so I don't think I'm gonna go back there again. And this is Geneva, which is a Pinay-owned bar. It's really, really cool. And then just notice here, this is a Filipino building. This is actually a dental office owned by Pinay, Dr. Octoman. And she owns this building, and it's a Filipino-owned dental clinic, right? But imagine, like, you see all these buildings, you see all these signs, but if you notice, they're all like in English, right? They're all in Roman alphabets. They're all in English. Imagine if these were in Baybayin, right? Then you'll notice more, oh, this is actually like a Filipino town, right? So if you drive through Little Tokyo, if you drive through like Chinatown, if you drive through the SGV, you'll know you're in a different place because you see different scripts, right? You see the Chinese script, Korean script, etc. But if that place, if historic Filipino town or any kind of place like Carson or West Covina, Panorama City, we're using Baybayin, then you see a little bit of Filipino more accentuated, more visible. And I would argue that visibility creates more political and cultural power for the Filipino American community. This is just a Photoshop of a Hong Kong street using Baybayin. This is not real. This is not a real place, but like this is what someone did in the internet, and you could see like if Filipinos were more legible or for more literate in Baybayin, then you could see kind of a difference. You could see more of a Filipino-ness within the buildings, and so that's kind of how I feel that Baybayin is important. It's a cultural thing that you don't just know it. You should really try to use it, and hopefully by using it a little bit more and more people will be educated on it, and then the culture survives. Our pre-colonial culture survives. So with that, I conclude, and I just want to ask if there's any questions out there. Any questions?
You have a thank you. I just want to add this. Somebody said, thank you so much for the session. They said that their kids are already stamping with their Baybayin stamps as you're leading
yes.
the session. So that's really great. And if you have any resources or references that people can start looking either online or, kind of print material that you could suggest?
Yeah, I do have stamps, but I forgot who made it. I bought it at FPAC one year, but there's like little ink stamps. You could just use an ink pad and kind of stamp um, wherever you want. It's pretty cool. Just real quick, a note: sources. Christian Kabuai, who's pictured here. He's an artist based in San Francisco. He has really dedicated his life to the preservation and preservation and spreading awareness about Baybayin. And Paul Morrow, he's actually a white Canadian dude, but he loves Baybayin and he has some good resources on the internet. Again, if you just Google Baybayin, you could find tons and tons of resources on how to write it. But again, I mean, I would encourage artists out there, people who use it. You use it more, create more artwork on it. Try to spread awareness of it. Any other questions? You got it from FPAC too, yeah.
Hey Joe, I just got a comment that was privately sent to me. This is Jason.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna read it. It's nice to know the large role that FilAm's played in bringing Babayan to the forefront of Filipino awareness. I went to school in the Philippines as a child, and we were taught about abacada, but there was no mention about the written script. This was my experience in school. However, it could be a different story for other Filipinos in different areas.
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of a footnote in Philippine history, like in the history books and stuff, and all the textbooks that I've seen. It's kind of just, this is the script, and then that's it, and then they move on, right? There's been some movements to try to make it more of a more proper use. Again, I think it has to come through a more deeper investment by the government in the Philippines to really make it widespread. But it's not impossible. I mean, Hangul, which is the Korean script, that was just made up by the king of Korea back in, I think, the 14th century or 13th century, something like that. And he basically said this has to be taught and make it widespread, and it happened. And now people kind of, write in Hangul all the time. And that was just made up by a king, right? They were sick of people using Chinese characters, so he made up his own Korean script. And I think it's possible. It just has to be kind of widespread investment in its education in the Philippines as well as here. So, thank you.
I think you had one question on the chat. Do you think Babayan would gain any traction, like in other parts of California and SoCal, let alone in the Philippines? Do you think that FilAms can help to increase that traction?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of people who have tried to revive it, have tried to kind of spread awareness of it. The difficult with using Baybayin is it's more of a cultural marker as opposed to something that people use every day. People won't use Baybayin every day, right? So unless it's kind of embedded within the economy, within society, and that really comes, in the Philippines. That really starts in the Philippines. I would argue, Filipino Americans have revived it as like a cultural symbol, but in terms of everyday use, no. There were long ways to make it for everyday use. So right now, it's more of a cultural kind of symbol for people who learn it or appreciate the Filipino culture.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, I met Christian, one of the people that you mentioned at Undiscovered SF.
Yeah.
So it was really great to see that and see him in his artistry. So if anybody has a chance to see that, it was amazing how he did that so quickly.
Yeah.
Like right on the spot.
And he has he actually worked on the mural in historic Filipino town, and it says like "Welcome to Hi-Fi." It was a mural paid by Right Back Ranch, which is a studio located in the area, and he was one of the designers and has incorporate Baybayin within the mural. He also has flashcards, which I have a deck that has Baybayin flashcards, and it's really kind of a handy tool to memorize it. Yeah, and again, this was a 40-minute workshop. I spent a lot of it talking about the history and kind of its cultural use, but really learning Baybayin wasn't that difficult, right? So it just takes practice. That's all. But it was a very easy script to learn. Any other questions? Were the examples, like the practice, were they useful?
Yes,
Okay.
they were kind of fun.
All right. All right. Any other questions?
I think those are all the questions
All
that we
right.
have. Yeah, but we just wanted to say thank you again, everyone, for participating in tonight's workshop. Joe, this was great. Thank you so much for just sharing the history and little practice tutorials that we can all practice at home, as well as the resources. So thank you very much. And we're wrapping up with Filipino American History Month next Friday, October 30th. We're concluding with just a wrap up of highlighting the contributions made by Filipinos to the U.S. history, and that's going to be with Dr. Rod Das Magduo. So that will be Friday, October 30th. So again, this has been a great workshop series. Thank you so much, Joe, for presenting and hosting and giving us some little tips and tricks and tutorials about Baybayin. So we appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating in it.
Thank
All
you.
right. Download those
everyone.
fonts. Look it up. Just Google Baybayin, learn it there. And it's not too hard to learn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Salamat.
Walang anuman. Oh, you want to check? Hi. Check out my podcast, this Filipino American Life. This FilipinoAmericanLife.com. Yes. Great.